In September of 2013, about 2 months before Steven Universe officially premiered, Cartoon Network quietly uploaded a pilot to their website. Not to television, not with any fanfare, a short, rough 11-minute episode that almost nobody watched. The animation was cruder, the color palette was different. Steven's voice was higher, less certain, and Rebecca Sugar, who had just left her position as a storyboard artist on Adventure Time, had embedded something into that pilot that wouldn't fully make sense for another 5 years. A small, pink lion, sleeping in the desert, doing absolutely nothing. That lion would eventually become one of the most important narrative devices in the entire show, a living vault of secrets belonging to a dead woman who never actually died. But in that pilot, he was just a weird pink cat in the sand, and nobody thought twice about it. That single detail, a throwaway visual gag in an unaired pilot, connected to a mythology so dense and so carefully constructed that fans would spend half a decade trying to untangle it. Most shows hide their depth. Steven Universe buried it. If you have been enjoying these videos lately, subscribing to the channel is genuinely the single best way to help us keep making them. It is completely free and it makes a bigger difference than you might think. So let us start where everyone starts. The surface. The part of Steven Universe you can explain to someone in about 30 seconds. A boy named Steven lives in a small beach town on the coast of Delmarva. He is half human, half alien. His mother was a gem, one of a species of sentient gemstones from outer space, who project hard light bodies and possess abilities tied to whatever type of stone they are. His mother, Rose Quartz, fell in love with a human man named Greg Universe, and when Steven was born, Rose gave up her physical form so that he could exist. Her gem, a pink quartz stone, now sits embedded in Steven's belly button. He inherited her powers, or some of them at least. The rest he would have to figure out on his own. He lives with 3 other gems: Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl. Together, they are the Crystal Gems, a rebel faction that broke away from the Gem homeworld thousands of years ago to protect Earth from being colonized and hollowed out. They live in a temple built into the side of a cliff, right next to the beach. Steven sleeps on a loft above the living room. There is a screen door that never quite closes properly. The town around them is called Beach City, and it is full of exactly the kind of people you would find in a quiet seaside community where nothing ever seems to happen. A donut shop, a pizza place, a car wash run by Steven's dad, an arcade that somehow stays in business despite having about 6 machines. The show premiered on November 4th, 2013 on Cartoon Network, created by Rebecca Sugar, who became the first woman to independently create a series for the network. That fact alone is worth sitting with for a moment because Cartoon Network had existed for over 2 decades by that point. Adventure Time, Regular Show, Dexter's Laboratory, The Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, Ed, Edd, and Eddy, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, Ben 10, Chowder, Flapjack. All of them created or co-created by men. Every single one. And then in 2013, Rebecca Sugar walked in with a pitch about a chubby kid with a gem in his belly button who cries a lot, and Cartoon Network said yes. The show ran for 5 seasons. 160 episodes, plus a movie, plus an epilogue series called Steven Universe Future. And by the time it was done, it had fundamentally altered what people believed an animated children's show could be about. But you already know all of this. If you are here, you have probably watched the show. You have probably seen Steven summon his shield for the first time, a bright pink bubble of protection that appears when someone he loves is in danger. You have probably watched Garnet punch things, which is one of the great simple pleasures of the show. You know that Pearl is precise, anxious, devoted to Rose's memory in a way that borders on worship. You know that Amethyst is loud and messy and funny, and hiding something heavy underneath all that bravado. You know that Steven is kind in a way that television rarely lets boys be kind. Not passive, not weak, just genuinely stubbornly compassionate. You know about the gem monsters. In the early episodes, that is mostly what the show is. Steven and the Crystal Gems go on missions to fight corrupted gems, creatures that were once rational beings but have lost their form in their minds, turning into beasts. They bubble them. They store them in the temple. It plays like a Monster of the Week cartoon, and if you stopped watching after 10 episodes, you could be forgiven for thinking that is all it was ever going to be. A cute show about a kid and his magic family fighting goofy creatures near the beach. And that is the trick. That is the first layer of the iceberg, the part floating above the waterline where the sun hits it. And everything looks bright and simple. Steven eats Cookie Cat ice cream bars. He watches a show called Crying Breakfast Friends. He has a best friend named Connie who reads fantasy novels and is smarter than basically everyone else in town. He rides on Lion, a magical pink animal that can create portals and has a pocket dimension inside its mane. The show is colorful, the music is gentle. Steven plays a ukulele. Nothing about the first dozen episodes suggests that this series is going to eventually deal with imperialism, colonialism, post-traumatic stress, toxic maternal legacies, genocide, identity dissolution, and the question of whether love is enough to fix someone who has been broken in ways they refuse to acknowledge. But the seeds are there from the very beginning. And one of the most absurd examples of this is the Cookie Cat song. You know the one. Steven sings it in the very first episode. It is a jingle for his favorite ice cream bar. And it goes like this. He left his family behind, a refugee of an interstellar war. Steven sings it with absolute joy. He loves Cookie Cat. He is just a kid excited about ice cream. But listen to those words again. He left his family behind, a refugee of an interstellar war. That is not a jingle about ice cream. That is the backstory of Pink Diamond. That is the entire mythology of the show, compressed into a commercial that a 12-year-old boy sings while dancing around his kitchen. And nobody, not Steven, not the audience, not anyone watching for the first time, has any idea what they are actually hearing. Rebecca Sugar did that on purpose. She wrote that lyric knowing exactly what it meant, knowing it would take years for anyone to connect it back to the truth about Steven's mother. And when you finally do connect it, when you are deep enough into the show to understand who Rose Quartz really was and what she actually did, that silly ice cream song becomes one of the most quietly devastating pieces of foreshadowing in animation history. A boy singing his mother's confession and not knowing it. That is how Steven Universe works. It gives you something that looks simple. It lets you enjoy it at face value. And then it waits, patiently, for you to come back and realize that what you were looking at was never simple at all. Take the temple. The crystal gems live inside a giant stone structure carved into the cliff face. It has a door that responds to each gem's gemstone. Inside are individual rooms, each one reflecting the personality and psyche of its owner. Pearl's room is full of waterfalls and floating platforms, clean and orderly and serene. Amethyst's room is a disaster, piles of junk and hoarded objects stacked to the ceiling. Garnet's room has lava and branching pathways. These are not just set dressing. These rooms are literal manifestations of each character's inner world. The temple is a map of their minds. And at the center of it all is a room that belongs to Rose Quartz, a room full of clouds that show you whatever you want to see. Steven discovers it eventually. He asks the room to show him his mother, and it does. It creates a version of Rose that talks to him, laughs with him, tells him she loves him. But it is not real. It is a projection, a fantasy built from Steven's longing and the room's desire to give him what he wants. And the episode where Steven realizes this, where he has to accept that no magic room can replace a mother he never met, is the first time the show lets you see the full weight of what it is actually about. Not gems, not magic, loss. The particular, specific, irreplaceable loss of a parent. And the worst realization underneath it, that the parent you lost might not have been who you thought they were. But that comes later. At the surface level, the temple is just cool. It has a giant statue with multiple arms. The door glows different colors. Steven thinks it is the greatest place in the world, and you think so too, because the show makes you feel what Steven feels. That is its greatest weapon. Not the plot twists, not the lore, the empathy. You experience the show through a boy who loves everything and everyone around him, and because he loves them, you love them, and because you love them, it is going to hurt so much more when you find out the truth. The early episodes establish a rhythm. There is a mission, the gems fight something, Steven tries to help and usually makes things worse before accidentally making them better. There are townspeople with their own small dramas. Lars is insecure and mean to everyone because he is terrified of being vulnerable. Sadie works at the donut shop and has a crush on Lars that she does not know how to express. Ronaldo runs a conspiracy blog and is almost always wrong about everything, except for the one time he is accidentally, horrifyingly right. The Pizzas run a restaurant. The Maheswarans are strict but loving. Greg Universe lives in his van and used to be a one-hit wonder musician who gave up his career for love. Each of these characters seems simple at first. That is the surface level reading. Lars is a jerk. Sadie is sweet. Greg is a lovable failure. But Steven Universe does not believe in simple people. It believes that everyone is carrying something. And if you are patient enough, if you are kind enough, if you are willing to sit with someone long enough, they will eventually show you what that something is. Lars is not mean because he is a bad person. Lars is mean because he grew up as a Filipino kid in a predominantly white town and never figured out how to belong. And the fear of being rejected turned into a wall of sarcasm and cruelty that he cannot take down even when he wants to. Sadie is not just sweet. Sadie is trapped in a job she hates, in a dynamic with Lars that takes more than it gives, in a relationship with her mother that suffocates her with love so aggressively that she has never had the space to figure out who she actually is. Greg is the most interesting one at the surface level. He is Steven's father. He is human. He has no powers, he lives in a van next to a car wash, and by any conventional measure, he is a failure. He had a brief music career that went nowhere. He fell in love with an alien woman who was thousands of years old and had fought in a war that predated human civilization. He had a son with her, and she died, or disappeared, or transformed. The show does not make this clear for a long time, and that ambiguity is intentional. Greg is left alone with a baby who has a gemstone in his stomach and abilities that no human parent could possibly understand. And what does Greg do? He loves him. That is it. He just loves him. He does not try to control Steven's powers. He does not resent the gems for being better equipped to raise his own son. He does not spiral into bitterness over losing Rose. He washes cars. He plays guitar. He tells Steven stories about his mother that are warm and kind and, we will later learn, profoundly incomplete. Greg Universe is the best parent in the show not because he is perfect, but because he is honest about what he does not know. The gems love Steven fiercely, but they are also projecting onto him. Pearl sees Rose and Steven and cannot fully separate the two. Amethyst sees a kid who might eventually outgrow her the way Rose did. Garnet sees a future she is trying to guide into existence. Greg sees his son, just his son. And he gives Steven the one thing the gems struggle to provide: the permission to be ordinary, to eat junk food and watch bad television, and play on the beach and not carry the weight of an ancient war on his shoulders every single day. The show understands something that most stories about chosen ones do not. Being special is a burden. Having a destiny is not a gift. Steven did not ask for his mother's gem. He did not ask to be half of something he does not fully understand. He did not ask for 3 immortal guardians who look at him and see the ghost of someone they loved or feared or served or resented. He just wanted to be a kid, and the surface level of Steven Universe lets him be one for a little while before the ocean pulls back and the iceberg starts to show. Even the tone of those early episodes is part of the design. The show is funny, genuinely funny. Steven's enthusiasm is infectious. Amethyst shape-shifting into ridiculous things for laughs. Pearl's horrified reactions to anything messy or unplanned. Garnet's deadpan delivery saying the most intense things with absolutely no change in expression. The humor makes you relax, it makes you trust the show, it makes you think you know what kind of story you are watching. And that trust is what makes the betrayal so effective when it comes. Because Steven Universe is, at its core, a show about betrayal, not the dramatic, villainous kind, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from people who loved you not telling you the truth because they thought you could not handle it, the kind that comes from realizing your hero had a past they never mentioned, the kind that comes from discovering that the foundation you built your identity on was a lie, not a malicious lie, but a lie told with love, which somehow makes it worse. All of that is coming, but at the surface, you do not see it. At the surface, you see a pink shield and a beach and a boy who sings about ice cream, and everything feels safe. That is the point. The surface is supposed to feel safe, because the deeper you go, the less safe it gets. The show's structure in those first episodes mirrors the structure of Beach City itself. Small, contained, familiar. You learn the geography quickly. The temple on the cliff, the boardwalk, the big donut, fish stew pizza, the car wash. It is a place where everyone knows everyone, where the biggest drama is whether Lars will ever admit he likes Sadie or whether Ronaldo's latest conspiracy theory has any merit. Beach City feels like a place where nothing truly bad could ever happen, and that feeling is a trap. Because Beach City is built on a battlefield. The temple is not just a house. It is a monument to a war that nearly destroyed the planet. The gem monsters Steven fights are not random creatures. They are casualties of that war, soldiers who were corrupted by a weapon so terrible that it shattered their minds and twisted their forms into something unrecognizable. Every time Steven bubbles one of those creatures, he is containing a victim. Not a villain. A victim. And he does not know this yet, but when he finds out, it will change everything about how he sees his mission. The kindergarten is mentioned early on, almost in passing, a place where gems were made, grown inside the earth like parasites, draining the life from the planet to create new soldiers. Amethyst came from there. She was made in the ground, not born, not chosen, not wanted. She was manufactured, and she emerged late after everyone else had already left. She came out small and alone in a dead canyon full of empty holes, and the crystal gems found her and took her in. But Amethyst knows what she is. She knows she was made to be a weapon for the other side, that her very existence is a byproduct of the colonization the crystal gems fought to stop. She is living proof of everything they stood against, and she loves them, and they love her. And nobody talks about it. That silence is the surface level, not ignorance. Silence. The things people choose not to say because saying them would mean dealing with them, and dealing with them would mean admitting that the happy life they have built together is constructed on top of something terrible. You watch the early episodes and you see a family, you see love, you see a kid growing up surrounded by people who would do anything to protect him. And all of that is true. But it is also true that this family is held together by secrets. And those secrets are going to start leaking through the cracks. The show gives you about 50 episodes of safety, 50 episodes of missions and jokes and beach city shenanigans, and Steven slowly learning to control his powers. And then, gradually you almost do not notice it happening, the questions start. Who was Rose Quartz, really? Why do the gems not talk about the war? What happened to the other crystal gems who fought alongside them? Why is Pearl so afraid of Garnet being angry? Why does Amethyst get so defensive when anyone mentions where she came from? Why does Garnet never take off her visor? The answers are there in the early episodes, hidden in plain sight. In the way Pearl's voice breaks when she talks about Rose. In the star-shaped hole in the fence at the kindergarten. In the mural on the temple wall that shows a figure with a diamond on her chest fighting against 3 others. In the Cookie Cat song. You just have to know where to look. And that is what the rest of this essay is about. Not the surface, the depths. The parts of Steven Universe that are not visible until you dive beneath what everyone knows and start asking the questions that the show spent 5 seasons very carefully teaching you to ask. There is a moment in Steven Universe that changes everything. Not a twist, not a cliffhanger, not some dramatic reveal played for shock value. It is a song, a love song, performed by a character you thought you already understood in a situation you absolutely did not see coming. And when you hear it, something clicks into place and you realize the show has been telling you a much bigger story than you thought. In the season 1 finale, an episode called Jailbreak, which aired on March 12, 2015, Garnet is split apart, forcibly separated into 2 smaller gems, a ruby and a sapphire, who have been imprisoned on a homeworld ship. Steven, confused and frightened, stumbles through the ship's corridors and finds them in separate cells. He frees them, and when they reunite when they see each other again, they don't just fuse back into Garnet. They embrace, they laugh, they cry, and then Garnet forms again, whole and powerful and furious, and she sings a song called Stronger Than You, performed by Estelle, the voice behind the character. The song is not about power, it is about love. About the fact that Garnet exists because 2 beings chose each other permanently, completely in defiance of everything their society told them was acceptable. And this is where the show stops being a quirky cartoon about a boy with a magic belly button and starts becoming something genuinely revolutionary. Because until this moment, you could watch Steven Universe casually. You could enjoy it the way you enjoy any well-made cartoon, for the jokes, for the colors, for the catchy songs. But after Jailbreak, after Stronger Than You, you cannot unknow what you now know about Garnet. You cannot unsee the love that holds her together, and that changes how you watch everything that came before and everything that comes after. Fusion in Steven Universe is not just a combat mechanic. It is not just 2 characters combining into a bigger, stronger character so they can punch harder. Fusion is a metaphor for relationships. It always was. From the very first fusion dance, the show was using this mechanic to say something real about what it means to be truly close to another person. Every fusion in the show represents a different kind of connection between the gems involved. Opal, the fusion of Pearl and Amethyst, is graceful but unstable, reflecting the tension and grudging love between those 2 characters. Stevani, the fusion of Steven and his friend Connie, is joyful and uncertain, the way a first close relationship feels when you are young and everything is new and slightly terrifying and wonderful all at once. Malachite, the fusion of Jasper and Lapis, is toxic and violent and terrifying. A relationship built on mutual destruction where neither party can let go, even though both parties are being destroyed. Sugilite, the fusion of Garnet and Amethyst, is wild and reckless, power without restraint. What happens when the fun parts of a connection drown out the responsibility? Each fusion tells you something true about the people inside it, about what they bring out in each other, about whether the connection is healthy or harmful or somewhere painfully in between. But Garnet is the thesis statement. Garnet is what fusion looks like when it is built on genuine, unwavering, unconditional love. Ruby and Sapphire are so committed to each other, so fundamentally intertwined, that their default state is togetherness. Garnet is not a temporary power-up. Garnet is a relationship that has lasted thousands of years. And the show presents this, a romantic relationship between two characters who are both coded female, not as something edgy or controversial or deserving of special commentary. It just is. It is the emotional core of the show. It is the strongest thing in the show. And when Garnet sings that she is made of love, that this is who she is, that she is stronger than anything the villain can throw at her, because of that love, you believe it. You feel it in your chest. The song became an anthem, not because it was trying to be political, because it was trying to be honest. And honesty, in this context, in a landscape where children's television had spent decades carefully avoiding this particular kind of honesty, turned out to be the most political thing the show could have done. Not by waving a flag, not by making a speech, just by telling the truth about what Garnet is and letting the audience feel it. And once you understand fusion, once you really get what it means in this world, the rest of the show opens up like a lock turning. Because the society that Ruby and Sapphire come from, the society that Garnet's existence defies, is one of the most quietly terrifying fictional civilizations ever put in a children's show. It is a society where fusion between different types of gems is not just frowned upon, it is forbidden. It is considered disgusting, perverse, an abomination against the natural order. When Jasper sees Garnet for the first time, she is revolted. She calls her a shameless display, a cheap trick, and in Jasper's eyes, she means it. To Homeworld, a ruby fusing with a sapphire is like matter merging with antimatter. It should not exist. And the fact that it does, the fact that it is beautiful, terrifies them. Because it means the categories are not real. It means the hierarchy is a choice, not a law of nature. And if that is true, then everything Homeworld is built on is a lie. Homeworld, the gem Homeworld. Ruled by the Diamond Authority, 4 immensely powerful beings known as White Diamond, Yellow Diamond, Blue Diamond, and Pink Diamond. They are not queens, they are not presidents, they are closer to gods. Each one presides over a rigid caste system that determines what every gem is, what every gem is allowed to be, from the moment they emerge from the ground. Pearls are servants, pretty accessories for the elite, designed to stand still and look decorative and follow orders without question. Rubies are expendable foot soldiers, interchangeable and disposable, valued for obedience rather than intelligence. Sapphires are aristocratic oracles, elevated for their usefulness. Bismuths are builders, strong and skilled but invisible, the working class of a society that does not acknowledge labor as dignified. Quartzes are warriors, bred for size and aggression. Lapis Lazulis are terraformers reshaping planets according to Homeworld's designs. And no one moves between categories. No one chooses their purpose. No one questions the hierarchy because the hierarchy is reality itself, enforced by beings so powerful that resistance seems not just futile but literally unthinkable. You are made for a purpose. You serve that purpose. You do not ask why. You do not wonder what else you could be. You do not dream. That is the deal. That is the only deal Homeworld offers. And for most gems, for the overwhelming majority of a civilization that spans galaxies, the deal is accepted without a second thought. Not because they are stupid, because they have no framework for imagining anything different. When your gods are real, when they are standing right there, when they can crush you with a thought, questioning the system is not brave. It is inconceivable. This is the civilization that created the crystal gems. This is the world Rose Quartz looked at and said no. Thousands of years before Stephen was born, Rose Quartz led a rebellion against Homeworld to protect the Earth from colonization. Because that is what Homeworld does. It colonizes planets, it drains them of their resources, their life, their potential, and uses them as raw material to create more gems. The kindergartens, those vast canyons you see in the show with their uniform holes carved into the rock face, those are where gems are made, and making gems kills the surrounding ecosystem. The process sucks the life force out of the planet, leaving behind nothing but dead, barren stone. You see the prime kindergarten in the show. It is one of the most unsettling locations in the series, not because it is dangerous, but because it is empty, dead. A canyon where nothing grows, where no insects buzz, where the wind carries nothing but dust. Every hole in the rock face represents a gem that was made at the cost of the life that once grew there. Amethyst came from the prime kindergarten. She emerged long after the war was over, alone in an empty facility on a dying strip of land, and she did not know why the world outside was alive and her birthplace was not. That realization, when it comes, is one of the show's quietest devastations. Homeworld has been doing this across the galaxy for millennia, planet after planet, world after world, consuming entire ecosystems to manufacture soldiers and servants and aristocrats, all to feed an empire that values order above everything and compassion not at all. The Earth was supposed to be just another colony, just another resource to be extracted and discarded. Just another world that would be used up and left behind, a dead husk spinning through space with nothing to show for its existence except the holes where its life used to be. Rose saw what would happen to Earth if Homeworld completed its plans. She saw the kindergartens expanding, the organic life dying, the planet being hollowed out from the inside. And she fought back. She gathered allies, gems who believed that there might be more to existence than serving the diamonds, and she waged a war. The Gem War. A conflict that lasted 1,000 years and scarred the planet and left the crystal gems victorious but broken. They won Earth's freedom, but the cost was enormous. Gems were shattered on both sides. The battlefield stretched across the planet. You can still see the remnants of it in the show, ancient weapons half buried in strawberry fields, the strawberry battlefield where thousands of gems fell and were never recovered. The crystal gems won, but they won the way you win a war that lasts 1,000 years. With losses so severe that victory barely feels like the right word, and the punishment for winning was worse than anything Rose could have imagined. Because when the diamonds left Earth, when they finally abandoned the colony they could not hold, they did not simply retreat. They attacked. All three remaining diamonds, white, yellow, and blue, combined their powers and unleashed what fans call the corrupting light, a blast of energy that washed over the entire planet and struck every gem on the surface. And it did not shatter them, it did not kill them cleanly, it did something far more terrible. It corrupted them. The corrupting light, as it came to be known, was not a weapon of destruction, it was a weapon of transformation. It tore their minds apart, warped their bodies, twisted them into monsters. Gems who had been people, who had thoughts and feelings and memories and names, became creatures. Feral, confused, in pain, unable to speak, unable to remember who they were, unable to recognize the friends they had fought beside. Think about that for a moment. Really sit with it. Not death, not destruction, madness. An entire army of rebels transformed into something unrecognizable, trapped inside distorted physical forms. Conscious enough to suffer, but not conscious enough to understand why. Garnet describes corruption as damage to the mind rather than the body. The gemstone itself is intact. The person is still in there, somewhere, buried under layers of confusion and pain, but they cannot reach the surface. They cannot find themselves. It is like watching someone you love lose their mind while their body keeps walking. The form is still there, the person is gone, and you do not know if they will ever come back. The crystal gems who survived, Rose and Garnet and Pearl, and later Amethyst, spent the next 5,000 years finding these corrupted gems one by one, fighting them, containing them, bubbling them in a desperate attempt to preserve what was left of their friends. That is what those bubbled gems in the temple represent. Not trophies, not prisoners, lost comrades that no one knows how to save. 5,000 years of grief stored in little translucent spheres, floating in a room that Steven walks through every day without fully understanding what he is looking at. And even corruption is not the darkest thing Homeworld did. There is a concept introduced in Season 2 in an episode called Keeping It Together that is genuinely one of the most disturbing ideas in any animated show. Forced fusion. After the Gem War, after the corruption attack, Homeworld gathered the shards of gems that had been shattered during the fighting. Shattered, meaning destroyed. Their physical forms gone, their gemstones broken into pieces, their consciousness fragmented into tiny, agonized splinters. And Homeworld took those fragments and forced them together, fused them against their will. Created amalgamations of dead gems, monstrous shapes made of mismatched limbs and anguished faces, things that were not alive in any meaningful sense, but were not fully dead either. They screamed. They reached out with too many hands. They writhed and clawed at the air and at themselves. They were aware enough to be in agony, but not aware enough to understand what had happened to them. This was Homeworld's experiment, a test, a proof of concept, because the forced fusions you encounter in Keeping It Together, as horrible as they are small. They are made of a handful of shards each, prototypes. And they were prototypes for something that makes them look like nothing. Because buried deep in the Earth's mantle, implanted there by Homeworld during the colonization, is something called the cluster, a forced fusion the size of the planet itself, made of billions of gem shards, growing slowly, gathering mass, waiting to take form. When the cluster emerges, it will tear the Earth apart from the inside. That was always the plan. That was Homeworld's endgame for the planet, even after the rebellion. They could not have the colony, so they weaponized it. They turned the Earth into a ticking bomb made of the remains of the crystal gems' fallen allies. Let that sink in. Billions of shards, each shard a fragment of a person who once had a name, a voice, a life. Each fragment aware in some dim and terrible way of being pressed against other fragments that do not belong to them. reaching out for a body that no longer exists, trying to form, trying to become whole again, but only finding other broken pieces to cling to. The cluster is not just a weapon. It is a mass grave that has been turned into a bomb. It is the war crime to end all war crimes, and it is ticking, sitting beneath the Earth's crust, growing, pulsing, waiting for the moment when it has enough mass to take form and split the planet in two, and nobody on the surface knows it is there. The humans go about their lives. Steven eats donuts at the Big Donut, and beneath their feet billions of shattered souls are slowly coalescing into an apocalypse. The forced fusions are not metaphorical. They are body horror in a show aimed at children, and the show does not flinch from what they represent. The violation of consent, the desecration of the dead, the cruelty of a civilization so obsessed with utility that it will repurpose corpses into weapons. When Garnet encounters these things for the first time, she nearly falls apart, literally. Her form destabilizes, not because they are frightening, though they are, but because she understands fusion. She understands what it means to be fused with someone you love, to share a body willingly, joyfully, as an expression of the deepest trust two beings can share. And she is looking at the opposite of that. She is looking at fusion as torture, as punishment, as the worst thing you could possibly do to a gem. And her horror is your horror, because by this point in the show, you understand it too. You have seen fusion as love. Now you are seeing fusion as desecration, and the contrast is unbearable. This is what lies beneath the surface of Steven Universe. Beneath the bright colors, and the ukulele songs, and the funny faces, and the donut shop in the gentle little town by the sea. Not just a story about a boy learning to use his powers. A story about empire, about resistance, about hierarchy and oppression and the people who benefit from systems that crush everyone else. About what happens when a civilization decides that efficiency matters more than empathy, that utility matters more than personhood, that the machine matters more than the people inside it. About what it costs to fight back, and what it costs to win, and what it costs to live with what you have done and what has been done to you. And the show tells this story so gently, so patiently, wrapped in so many layers of warmth and humor and genuine affection for its characters, that by the time you realize how dark it actually is, you are already too invested to look away. You are already in too deep to climb back out, which is fitting because we are about to go deeper still, down past the things a casual viewer picks up on a second watch, past the themes that become clear once you finish the series, down to the level where the details start to feel like secrets, where you need to pause on a single frame of background art or listen very carefully to a throwaway line from a character nobody takes seriously. This is the part of the iceberg where the community lives, where the fan theorists and the rewatchers and the obsessive screenshot takers have been building their case for years. But here is where it gets really interesting, because the really remarkable thing, the thing that separates Steven Universe from other shows with hidden depth, is not how dark it gets. Plenty of shows get dark. The remarkable thing is that it told you everything from the very beginning. It hid the answers in plain sight, in background art, in throwaway jokes, in a song about ice cream. And most people did not notice until it was far too late. Take the Cookie Cat jingle. The very first episode, Steven sings a silly little song about his favorite ice cream treat. A frozen treat with an all-new taste who came to this planet from outer space. A refugee of an interstellar war. He left his family behind. It is played for laughs. Steven is a goofy kid singing about ice cream, but go back and listen to those words after you have finished the show. A refugee of an interstellar war who left his family behind. That is not about Cookie Cat, that is about Rose Quartz. That is about Pink Diamond. That is about a being who abandoned her diamond family, who fled a galactic empire, who came to Earth and never went back. The very first song in the very first episode is a coded summary of the show's central mystery, dressed up as a jingle for a novelty dessert. And the details go even further than the lyrics. The ice cream itself is half vanilla, half strawberry, half the pale tone of Rose Quartz's skin, half the vivid pink of Pink Diamond. Even the product design is foreshadowing. Rebecca Sugar put the entire story in the pilot and trusted, with what must have been extraordinary confidence, that no one would notice. And no one did. Not until years later, when the pieces finally came together and fans went back to the beginning and realized the answer had been sitting in their laps since episode 1, wrapped in a jingle they had been humming without understanding. Or take the mural. In season 1, episode 8, an early episode called Serious Steven, the crystal gems explore a pyramid temple. On the walls of that temple, there is a mural. It depicts a figure that looks like Rose Quartz battling another figure, a tall, imposing gem with a diamond shape on her body. At the time, in 2013, nobody knew what to make of it. It was just background art, a piece of ancient history that added flavor to an adventure episode. But that mural appears in 2013. The pink diamond reveal does not happen until 2018. 5 years. For 5 years, the answer was painted on a wall in what most viewers dismissed as a filler episode, visible to anyone who paused and looked, and the show just let it sit there. It did not draw attention to it. It did not zoom in dramatically or play ominous music. It just existed quietly, patiently, waiting for you to come back with new eyes and see it for what it always was. A spoiler hiding in plain sight since practically the beginning of the series. The show trusted you to miss it the first time, and it trusted you to come back. That kind of storytelling requires either extraordinary arrogance or extraordinary faith, and in Rebecca Sugar's case, it was clearly the latter. She believed the audience would return. She believed the details would be found. And she was right. Or take the diamond insignia. If you pay attention to gem architecture throughout the show, you will notice a recurring symbol. 4 diamond shapes arranged in a pattern, white on top, yellow to the left, blue to the right, and pink at the bottom. This appears in the ancient sky arena in the season 2 episode Sworn to the Sword. 4 diamonds representing the 4 members of the Diamond Authority. But on homeworld ships, on modern gem structures, on anything built after a certain point in history, the symbol only shows 3 diamonds. The pink one is gone, broken, missing, and no one in the show talks about it. No one explains why. The characters walk past these symbols without comment, and the camera does not linger. The show just presents the evidence and trusts you to ask the question: what happened to the 4th diamond? What happened to make an entire civilization scrub one of its rulers from every symbol, every record, every structure, every piece of architecture across a galactic empire? The answer, when it comes, is one of the most devastating twists in animation history. But the question was there from the start, carved into the background art, waiting for someone to notice that a shape was missing. And then there is Ronaldo. This one might be the most brilliant piece of foreshadowing in the entire show, and it works precisely because you are conditioned to ignore it. Ronaldo Fryman is the conspiracy theorist character. He is the blogger, the joke, the nuisance. He runs a website called Keep Beach City Weird and posts unhinged theories about the strange things happening in town. Ronaldo is played for comedy, consistently. He is loud and paranoid and socially oblivious and wrong about almost everything. He thinks Beach City is under attack from snake people, which is obviously completely hilariously absurd. But in the middle of one of his rants, buried beneath layers of nonsense, he says something that should stop you cold. He says the words polymorphic sentient rocks. He describes a diamond authority. He describes beings that have come to Earth to hollow it out. And he is right. That is the punchline. That is the joke that is not a joke. Not in the ballpark right. He is almost exactly word for word correct. Polymorphic sentient rocks is literally what gems are. The Diamond Authority is literally the name of the ruling body. Hollowing out the Earth is literally what the cluster is designed to do. The show's most ridiculous character, the one you are trained to laugh at, to dismiss, to skip past on your way to the real story, delivers a nearly perfect summary of the central conspiracy of the entire series. And nobody, not the characters and not the audience, takes him seriously. Because why would you? He is Ronaldo. He is the joke. And that is exactly why it works. The show hid its biggest truth inside its least credible messenger, and it knew, with absolute certainty, that you would look right past it. There is something almost cruel about how well that trick works. You laughed at the answer. You laughed at the truth. And the show let you because it knew you were not ready to hear it yet. It is the storytelling equivalent of telling someone the ending of a movie in a language they do not speak. The information is delivered. The recipient just cannot process it. And by the time they learn the language, by the time the show has taught them enough to understand what Ronaldo was actually saying, it is too late to feel clever about it. You can only feel humbled. There is also Lion, the big pink cat who shows up early in the series and seems like a fun mascot, a quirky companion for Steven to ride around on. Kids love Lion. He is cute and mysterious and silent, and he makes a good plush toy. He shows up when Steven needs him, he falls asleep in inconvenient places, and he has a habit of licking things. But Lion is not just a pet. Lion is a mystery wrapped inside a mystery, and his existence is one of the show's longest-running pieces of foreshadowing. His mane is a portal to a pocket dimension, a vast pink savanna stretching out under a cotton candy sky where Rose Quartz kept her most important possessions. Her sword, the one forged by Bismuth, her videotape, the one she recorded for Steven before she gave up her physical form, her secrets, the things she wanted preserved but did not trust anyone else to protect. And eventually you learn why Lion is pink, why he has these powers, where he came from. Lion was an ordinary lion centuries ago, a desert lion who lived and died the way all mortal things do. And Pink Diamond, Rose Quartz, brought him back to life with her powers. When she did, his fur turned pink, and his mane became a gateway to that pocket dimension. Lion is not just connected to Rose, Lion is evidence of something Rose could do that she told absolutely no one about. Not Pearl, not Garnet, no one. She could resurrect the dead. She had the power to reach into death and pull something back, changed but alive, connected to her in a way that transcended ordinary existence. And she used that power quietly, privately, on a companion she loved, and then kept it secret for thousands of years. When Lars dies later in the show and Steven brings him back the same way, turning his skin pink and his hair into another portal to that same dimension, it is a revelation, but it was foreshadowed by Lion's very existence in Season 1. Every time Steven pulled Rose's sword from Lion's mane, every time he stepped into that pink dimension and looked around in wonder, the answer was right there. He just did not know the question yet. None of us did. And that is the genius of it. The answer was not hidden in a locked room or a coded message. It was sleeping on the couch. It was purring. It was right there, being pet by a child who did not yet understand what his mother had been capable of. And then there are the off-colors. Deep in Homeworld, far from the gleaming spires and the diamond palaces, hiding in abandoned tunnels beneath a decommissioned kindergarten, living in perpetual fear, is a group of gems who do not fit. They are the rejects, the mistakes. The ones Homeworld would shatter on sight if it found them. Each one represents a different kind of deviation from the rigid norms that Homeworld enforces. And each one tells you something specific and heartbreaking about what that society considers unforgivable. Rhodonite is a fusion, a pearl and a ruby who fell in love, just like Ruby and Sapphire, just like Garnet. But unlike Garnet, who had the protection of the crystal gems and the freedom of Earth, Rhodonite has nothing. No rebellion to join. No planet to escape to. She lives in hiding because her existence is a crime. Her components were owned by a Morganite, a higher-ranking gem, and when they were discovered fusing, they were not punished. They were replaced. Simply cast aside as if they had malfunctioned, as if love were a glitch in the software. And Rhodonite has been terrified ever since, constantly anxious, constantly looking over her shoulder, flinching at every sound, because she knows what Homeworld does to gems who fuse outside their caste. She is Garnet without the safety net. She is what Garnet's story looks like without a Rose Quartz to fight for her, without a rebellion to give her a home, without an Earth to escape to. She is the version of that love story where the lovers do not get a happy ending, where they just get to survive, barely in the dark, forever looking over their shoulder. And the show never says this explicitly. It does not need to. You look at Rhodonite and you see what could have been. You see how close Garnet's story came to being a tragedy instead of a love story. One different choice, one missing ally, one fewer act of defiance, and Garnet could have been Rhodonite. Terrified, hunted, hiding in a hole for eternity. Fluorite is a fusion of 6 gems. 6. She moves slowly, speaks in a calm, stretched-out voice that takes its time arriving at each word, and is so large she can barely fit through doorways. She is also one of the most radical things the show ever did, and the show treats her so gently, so matter-of-factly, that you might not even realize how radical she is until you think about it later. Fluorite is essentially a polyamorous relationship, made visible, made literal, given a body and a voice. 6 individuals who chose to be together permanently in a single form, not because they had to, not because it gave them power, but because they wanted to be close to each other in the most complete way possible. And she is open to more. She says so calmly and without shame. If they meet the right gem, she would welcome another. On Homeworld, fluorite would be an abomination, an obscenity, a crime against the natural order that would justify immediate destruction. The show sees her as gentle, wise, and beautiful. That contrast between how Homeworld sees difference and how the show sees difference tells you everything about what Steven Universe values and what it is asking you to value. And Pedparacha. A sapphire, sapphires are supposed to see the future. That is their entire purpose in the caste system. That is why they are valued, why they have status, why they are allowed to exist in the upper echelons of gem society. They are useful because they can predict what will happen next. But Pedparacha cannot do that. Her visions are of the past. She sees things that have already happened, usually moments after they occur, and announces them with complete sincerity and genuine delight, as if sharing wonderful news. On Homeworld, this makes her defective, useless. A sapphire who cannot fulfill her function has no right to exist, no place in the hierarchy, no value whatsoever. But Padparadscha is delightful. She is joyful and earnest and completely unself-conscious about her difference, and her so-called defect is actually kind of wonderful when you stop measuring it by homeworld standards. She is a gem who experiences the recent past with the same wonder and excitement that Oat. And now we reach the part of the iceberg where the water gets cold. Not cold in a dramatic way, not cold like a jump scare or a sudden twist, but cold in the way that deep water is cold. Quiet, pressurized. The kind of cold that makes you realize just how far below the surface you have gone and just how much was happening behind the scenes of this show that you never knew about. Because Steven Universe, for all its warmth and all its heart, was a show that was constantly fighting for its own survival. And the decisions that shaped it, the ones that determined what you saw and what you never got to see, those decisions were not always creative. Sometimes they were political, sometimes they were financial, and sometimes they were acts of defiance so deliberate that they nearly cost the show everything. Let me start with something that most people have never heard. Season 5 of Steven Universe was originally supposed to be longer. Not just a few minutes longer or an episode longer, but meaningfully, structurally longer. There was an episode planned, an actual episode in development, that would have explored the origin of the diamonds and the gem race itself. Think about what that means. The single biggest unanswered question in the entire mythology of this show: where did the diamonds come from? Who or what created them? How did gem civilization begin? All of that was going to be addressed. It was in the pipeline, it was part of the plan, and then the production order was reduced, and that episode was scrapped. Gone. Not postponed, not reworked into a later season, just removed from existence because the show no longer had the space for it. You have to sit with that for a moment. The lore that fans have spent years theorizing about, the origin of everything, was at one point going to be canon. Rebecca Sugar and the team had a version of that story. They knew the answer, or at least they had an answer they were prepared to commit to screen. And the reason you never got to hear it has nothing to do with storytelling choices or artistic restraint. It has to do with a production order being cut. It has to do with a spreadsheet somewhere in a Cartoon Network office that said this show gets fewer episodes now, and the team having to decide what to keep and what to sacrifice. And the reason that production order was cut is one of the most important stories in the history of modern animation, because it has almost nothing to do with ratings or budget or any of the usual reasons a show gets shortened. Steven Universe was cut short because Rebecca Sugar made a choice. Sugar chose to include the wedding of Ruby and Sapphire, not as a subtext, not as a suggestion, not as something you could interpret one way or another depending on your comfort level. An explicit, on-screen, undeniable wedding between two female-coded characters on a children's network, complete with vows and a kiss, and the full emotional weight of everything that relationship had meant across the entire run of the show. Sugar knew what that decision would cost. This was not naivety. This was not an artist who pushed a boundary without understanding the consequences. Sugar understood, clearly and specifically, that including the wedding would result in the show being censored in multiple international markets, that entire countries would refuse to air those episodes, that the revenue lost from those markets would directly impact the show's standing with the network. And Sugar pushed for it anyway, not recklessly, not without thought, but with the full knowledge that this choice might end the show, and the equally full conviction that making the show without this choice would betray everything it had ever stood for. And that is exactly what happened. The wedding aired, countries pulled the show, revenue dropped in international markets, and the production order for the remaining episodes was reduced. The grand, expansive finale that Sugar had envisioned, the one that would have had room for diamond origins and deeper lore, and all the narrative space a story this complex deserved, was compressed. Squeezed down, the team had to make brutal choices about what stayed and what went, and they made those choices under the pressure of a clock that was ticking faster than anyone had planned. What Sugar did manage to negotiate was 6 additional episodes. 6. That is what the Era 3 arc is built on. 6 episodes to wrap up a mythology that had been building for 5 years. 6 episodes to address the diamonds, resolve the corruption arc, deal with White Diamond, and bring the story to some kind of meaningful conclusion. The fact that Change Your Mind works at all, that it manages to feel like a satisfying ending despite the compression, is a testament to how skilled the creative team was. But it is also a testament to what was lost. You can feel the missing space if you know where to look. The pacing in those final episodes is faster than anything else in the series. Emotional beats that would have breathed for entire episodes in earlier seasons are compressed into minutes. Character moments that deserved room to land are rushed past because there simply was not enough time. And this is not gossip. This is the architecture of the show you watched. Every choice that was made in those final episodes, every plot thread that was resolved quickly or left dangling, every character who got less screen time than they deserved, All of it traces back to this single decision: Sugar chose representation over safety. Chose honesty over longevity, and the show paid for it with its own ending. The movie tells a similar story of compression, though in a different way. Steven Universe the movie, which was always intended as a 90-minute special, ended up running about 10 minutes longer than the network originally wanted. And even at that extended length, content was cut. There was a sequence where Steven's entire life was supposed to flash before his eyes, a comprehensive retrospective that would have served as both a narrative device and an emotional anchor for longtime viewers. That was cut. There were additional amethyst shape-shifting sequences that were removed. And there was dialogue, actual written and presumably recorded dialogue, that explained the origin of Spinel's Rejuvenator, the weapon she uses to reset the gems. That dialogue would have established that the Rejuvenator was originally Pink Diamond's equipment, a piece of technology that belonged to Steven's mother, which adds an entirely different layer to Spinel's attack. She was not just using any weapon. She was using Pink's weapon. She was turning Pink Diamond's own tools against the life Pink Diamond had built after abandoning her. That thematic resonance was in the script, and it was cut for time. This is what production reality does to art. It shaves off the edges, it removes the connective tissue that makes a story feel whole. And the audience never knows what they lost because they never saw it in the first place. You watched the movie and it felt complete because that is all you had. But there is a version of that movie with 10 more minutes of material that would have made the emotional beats land differently, that would have given you more time to sit with the weight of what was happening, and you will never see it. The same is true of characters who never made it to screen at all. There were concepts for a character called Mega Pearl that never materialized in the way the team originally envisioned. There was a gem called Morganite who was designed but never used, and there were two characters, Flint and Shirt, who were originally conceived as part of the Off-Colors, that ragtag group of misfit gems that Lars encounters in the depths of Homeworld. Flint and Shirt were developed enough to have designs and roles, but they were cut from the Off-Colors lineup during production. They did eventually appear, but only as background characters in the Steven Universe future episode Homeworld Bound, which means they exist in the show's universe but never got the story they were designed to carry. They are ghosts of a show that had more to say than it was allowed to say. And all of this, every cut and every compression, and every character who never got their moment, exists in tension with the sheer ambition of what Steven Universe was trying to do. Because this was not a simple show. This was not a show that could afford to lose episodes without consequence. Every thread in the narrative was connected to every other thread, and when you pull threads out, the whole tapestry shifts. The show you watched is beautiful, but it is also, in a very real sense, incomplete. Not because the creators ran out of ideas, but because they ran out of time. What makes this even more remarkable is where the show came from creatively. Rebecca Sugar's influences were not the obvious ones. Yes, there are the standard animation references that any creator of Sugar's generation would cite, but the deeper influences are stranger, more personal, more revealing of what the show was actually trying to be. Sugar has spoken openly about the impact of Aimee Mann's music on the emotional texture of the show. Mann, the singer-songwriter known for work that is deeply melancholic and precisely crafted, influenced not just the tone of Steven Universe's music, but its approach to sadness. The show treats sadness the way Mann treats it in her songs, as something to be examined carefully rather than resolved quickly, as a state that contains its own kind of beauty if you are willing to sit with it long enough. Dragon Ball Z is in there too, which might seem contradictory until you think about what Dragon Ball Z actually is underneath the screaming and the power levels. It is a show about escalation, about the constant need to become stronger, about what happens when the stakes keep rising and the hero keeps having to find new reserves of power. Steven Universe takes that structure and inverts it. Where Goku gets stronger by fighting harder, Steven gets stronger by caring deeper. The escalation is emotional rather than physical, but the architecture is the same. Each arc raises the stakes. Each villain is more powerful and more deeply entrenched than the last. And each resolution requires Steven to dig further into himself than he has ever gone before. Revolutionary Girl Utena is perhaps the most telling influence, and the one that explains the most about the show's relationship to gender, power, and the structures that trap people in roles they never chose. Utena is a show about a girl who decides to become a prince, about the systems of power that try to force her back into a prescribed role, and about the radical act of refusing to accept the identity that society has assigned you. You can draw a direct line from Utena to Steven Universe's treatment of gem hierarchy, of the Diamond Authority, of the rigid caste system that tells every gem what they are and what they are allowed to be. Both shows are about the violence of categorization and the liberation of refusing to be categorized. And Hayao Miyazaki sits underneath all of it, the foundational belief that animated storytelling can be as deep, as complex, as emotionally sophisticated as any other form of art. Miyazaki's worlds are places where the boundaries between good and evil are blurry, where the villain is often someone who has been hurt and is passing that hurt along, where the resolution comes not from defeating the enemy, but from understanding the ecosystem that created the conflict in the first place. Steven Universe is built on that same foundation. It is a show that believes in the intelligence of its audience and refuses to simplify for the sake of accessibility. You can hear all of these influences in the music, which is not incidental to the show but central to it. Sugar wrote most of the songs personally, and the process of writing them was inseparable from the process of writing the show itself. The most famous example is Love Like You, the credits theme that played at the end of every episode. That song took the entire run of the series to complete. Sugar started writing it early in the show's development, and kept adding to it as the series progressed, with the lyrics evolving as the show matured, as the characters deepened, as Sugar's own understanding of what the show is about continued to change. The early verses are tentative, searching, uncertain of who is speaking and who is being spoken to. The later verses are more confident but also more vulnerable, arriving at a place of emotional honesty that mirrors the show's own journey from a lighthearted adventure to a profound meditation on love and identity and what it means to be worthy of being cared for. That is not how television music usually works. Television music is functional, it sets a mood, it plays during transitions, it signals to the audience what they should be feeling. The music in Steven Universe does all of that, but it also does something else. It carries the emotional narrative of the show in a way that the dialogue alone cannot. The songs are not interruptions. They are the show at its most honest, the moments where the characters stop speaking to each other and start speaking to themselves, or to you, or to no one at all, just putting something true into the air and letting it hang there. The people who made all of this possible were a team that called themselves the Crewniverse, a name that captures both the familial closeness of the group and the creative universe they were building together. The Crewniverse was not just a production team, it was an incubator. The people who worked on Steven Universe went on to shape the next generation of animated television. You can trace the DNA of this show through the careers of dozens of artists, writers, and directors who passed through the Crewniverse and then went out into the industry carrying everything they had learned. Lamar Abrams, who storyboarded and wrote for the show, went on to develop his own projects. Others scattered across studios, carrying with them a specific approach to storytelling that valued emotional honesty above all else, that treated animation as a medium capable of saying things that live action could not, that believed children deserved stories as complex and as true as anything made for adults. The Crewniverse was also, not coincidentally, one of the most diverse creative teams in the history of American animation. The show's commitment to representation was not just on screen, it was in the room. The people making decisions about how these characters would look, move, speak, and feel were people who brought their own experiences of identity, of queerness, of being different, of fighting to be seen, into the work. And you can feel that in every frame. The show does not depict diversity from the outside, it depicts it from the inside. The difference is... And so here is where we stand, at the bottom of a tier that is all about what happened behind the curtain. The show you watched was shaped by forces you never saw, by budget cuts and network negotiations and international censorship, and the deliberate, courageous choice of a creator who decided that telling the truth was worth more than telling a longer story. Every missing episode, every cutscene, every character who never got their arc, all of it is the cost of what the show chose to be. And what it chose to be was honest. Radically, stubbornly, expensively honest. Even when that honesty meant the story could not be told the way it deserved to be told. That is the abyss. Now we go deeper. There is a point in every mythology where the questions stop having answers. Not because the answers are hidden, not because the story has not gotten around to them yet, but because the mythology itself has decided that some things are beyond knowing. Steven Universe reaches that point, and what is remarkable is how deliberately it stays there. The show does not fumble its deepest mysteries. It chooses them. It looks directly at the void at the center of its own lore and decides with full awareness that some doors are better left unopened. Start with White Diamond, because she is where the show's mythology touches something genuinely unsettling. For years before her actual appearance, White Diamond existed in the fandom as a theory. The most popular version went something like this. White Diamond is not a single gem. She is a fusion of all three other diamonds, the original form from which yellow, blue, and pink were separated. It was elegant. It fit the show's themes of fusion and identity. It would have made narrative sense, and it was completely wrong. What the show actually gave us was far stranger and far more disturbing. White Diamond is not a fusion. She is something that believes itself to be perfect, not confident. Not arrogant in the way that Yellow Diamond is arrogant, with her militaristic certainty, or the way Blue Diamond is certain in her grief. White Diamond has moved past all of that. She has arrived at a place of absolute self-assurance so total that she does not even recognize the possibility of being wrong. She does not argue. She does not debate, she simply assumes, with the calm of someone describing the weather, that she is correct about everything, that her way of seeing the universe is the only way, and that anyone who disagrees is not wrong but broken. And then she demonstrates what that means in practice. She controls other gems' minds, she reaches into them and overwrites their personality with her own, not out of cruelty but out of what she genuinely believes is kindness. In her mind, she is fixing them. She is removing the flaws, the imperfections, the parts that deviate from the ideal. She turns them white. She makes them extensions of herself. And she does this with the serene, unshakable conviction of someone who truly cannot comprehend that other beings might have value in their own right, as themselves, with all their imperfections intact. That is one of the most chilling villain concepts in any children's show ever made, because White Diamond is not evil in the way that villains are usually evil. She does not want to destroy, she does not want to conquer for the sake of power. She wants to help, she wants to fix the universe. And her idea of fixing it is to erase everything that makes anyone different from her. She is the logical endpoint of perfectionism, the final form of the belief that there is one right way to be and everything else is a deviation. She is conformity given godlike power, and she is terrifying precisely because she is so calm about it. But here is the question that the show never answers, and the one that haunts the entire mythology if you think about it long enough. Where did White Diamond come from? Where did any of the diamonds come from? What is the origin of gems? This is not a question the show forgot to address. This is a question the show deliberately, conspicuously refused to address. Gems are described in the show as light constructs projected from a gemstone. Their physical bodies are holograms. Their gemstone is their true self, the core from which everything else emanates. They are created in kindergartens, injected into the crust of a planet, and they emerge fully formed with a predetermined purpose and a predetermined place in the hierarchy. The show explains all of that clearly. But who built the first kindergarten? Who created the diamonds? Who decided that gems would be divided into castes? That some would be warriors and some would be servants and some would be rulers? The show gives you nothing. Not a hint, not a myth within the mythology. Not even a creation story that the gems tell each other. The origin of the gem race is a perfect black hole at the center of the show's lore, and the show is entirely comfortable leaving it that way. You could argue that this is a flaw, that a mythology this detailed owes its audience a cosmogony, an origin point, a moment of creation that explains why everything is the way it is. But you could also argue, and the show seems to be arguing, that the absence of an origin is the point. The diamonds do not know where they came from. They have always existed as far as they know. And that lack of origin, that inability to point to a creator or a purpose or a reason, is part of what makes White Diamond the way she is. She fills the void with herself. She declares herself perfect because there's nothing above her to tell her otherwise. The absence of a creator creates a creature that believes it is its own creator. And that is a kind of existential horror that the show lets you sit with without ever quite naming it. Now, take that philosophical vertigo and apply it to something more personal. Apply it to Pearl. Because the story of Pearl, the Pearl you know from the first episode, the Pearl who is part of the Crystal Gems, is not the story you think it is. And once you understand the full picture, it reframes almost everything she has ever done. Here is what the show eventually reveals, piece by piece, across multiple seasons in the sequel series. The Pearl you know was not originally Pink Diamond's Pearl. She was White Diamond's Pearl. She was created for White Diamond, served White Diamond, belonged to White Diamond in the way that all pearls in Gem Society belong to their assigned diamond. At some point, she was given to Pink Diamond, reassigned, handed down. The reasons for this are never fully explained, but the implication is that White Diamond decided Pink needed a pearl and gave her one of her own. So, the Pearl you have watched for the entire series, the Pearl whose devotion to Rose Quartz defined her character, who fought in the rebellion, who spent thousands of years grieving a love she could never fully have, she was never truly Pink's Pearl to begin with. She was a gift, a hand-me-down, property transferred from one owner to another. And then there is Volleyball. Pink Pearl, the Pearl who was actually made for Pink Diamond, her original Pearl, the one who was with Pink before the rebellion, before Rose Quartz, before any of it. And what happened to Volleyball is one of the darkest reveals in the entire series. Pink Diamond, in one of her tantrums, damaged her, cracked her. hurt her so badly that the damage was visible, a crack running across her eye that never fully healed. And after that, White Diamond took volleyball away from Pink and gave Pink the pearl we know instead. Think about what that means. The pearl you have spent the entire series with was given to Pink Diamond as a replacement for the pearl that Pink Diamond broke. Our Pearl's entire existence in Pink's court, her entire relationship with Pink Diamond and then with Rose Quartz, is built on the foundation of Pink's violence towards someone else. Pearl was not chosen, she was assigned, and her legendary devotion, the love that defined her for thousands of years, began as a transaction, a bureaucratic reshuffling to cover up the fact that Pink Diamond had hurt someone. The show does not dwell on this in the way you might expect. It does not turn it into a dramatic confrontation or a moment of shattering revelation. Instead, it lets the knowledge settle, the way uncomfortable truths tend to settle in real life. Slowly, quietly, in a way that changes everything without changing anything visible. Pearl is still Pearl. Her love was still real. Her sacrifice was still genuine. But the context around it shifts, and the shift is permanent. This brings us to the question of what gems actually are and whether the word alive applies to them. Because the show raises this question in ways that are genuinely disturbing if you follow them to their logical conclusion. A gem's body is a hologram. It is not real in the physical sense. It is a projection of light shaped by the gem's self-image, emanating from the gemstone. The gemstone is the gem. Everything else is an expression, an avatar, a way of interacting with the physical world. When a gem is poofed, when their physical form is destroyed, the gemstone remains and the gem can regenerate. Their body is disposable. Their gem is eternal. But what happens when the gemstone is shattered? The show answers this, and the answer is horrifying. When a gem is shattered, the shards retain fragments of consciousness. Not full awareness, not coherent thought, just fragments. Pieces of a mind broken apart, each piece still dimly aware of something but unable to form a complete experience. The gem is not dead in the way that death usually works. The gem is scattered, distributed, broken into pieces that are each individually still experiencing something, still reaching for something, still trying to be whole. And the forced fusions take that horror and multiply it. In the kindergarten, you discover that Homeworld was experimenting with shattered gems, taking the fragments of broken gems and forcing them together into new forms. Not fusions in the way that Garnet is a fusion, not voluntary, not beautiful, not an expression of love or connection. These are gems stitched together in agony. Consciousness fragments jammed into proximity with other consciousness fragments, each one trying to be a whole person and failing, each one aware enough to suffer but not aware enough to understand why. They are an abomination, and the show treats them as such. They are played for horror, not for spectacle. When Steven encounters them, the tone shifts entirely. These are not enemies to be fought. These are victims to be mourned. And this raises the question that the show never quite answers. Are gems alive? Not in the biological sense, obviously. They do not eat, they do not breathe, they do not reproduce the way organic life does, but they think, they feel, they love, they grieve, they make choices, they change, and when they are broken, something that was them continues to exist in a state of suffering. If that is not life, what is it? If consciousness persists after the destruction of the body, if fragments of awareness can exist in isolation, each one carrying some echo of the person that was, then what exactly is a gem? And what does it mean that an entire civilization built itself on the systematic creation, categorization, and occasionally destruction of these beings? The nature of Steven's gem pushes this question even further into territory that has no comfortable answers. When White Diamond removes Steven's gem in Change Your Mind, something happens that should not be possible. Two separate beings exist. There is human Steven, the organic half, the boy with a body and blood and a heartbeat. And there is Gem Steven, the pink glowing figure made of light, the projection of the gemstone. They are both Steven. They are both real, neither one is a copy or an echo or a lesser version. They are two complete halves of a single being, and when they come back together, the reunion is not a correction. It is a choice. They are drawn to each other not because one is incomplete without the other, but because they are, together, something that has never existed before. Steven is not a human with gem powers. He is not a gem with a human body. He is a new kind of being entirely, a form of existence that has no precedent in the entire history of either species. The show lets that sit without explanation. It does not give you a taxonomy. It does not tell you what category Steven belongs to. It simply shows you that he exists, that his existence is unprecedented, and that both halves of him are equally real. And in a show that has spent its entire run arguing against categorization, arguing that the rigid boxes society puts people in are always smaller than the people they contain. That feels like the ultimate expression of its philosophy. Steven cannot be categorized because Steven is proof that the categories themselves are insufficient. And then there is Lars. Lars, the anxious, insecure, perpetually terrified teenager who spends the first few seasons of the show being the character you are mildly annoyed by. The one who is too scared to be honest, too proud to be vulnerable, too trapped in his own self-image to let anyone see who he actually is, and then he dies. It happens on Homeworld in a moment of unexpected bravery. Lars, who has spent the entire show running from everything, finally stands his ground. He protects the off-colors, the misfit gems who have been hiding in the depths of Homeworld, and the effort kills him. His body goes still. The color drains out of him. And Steven, holding Lars, begins to cry. Steven's tears bring Lars back. Not as he was, but changed. His skin turns pink like Lion's. His hair becomes a portal, a pocket dimension that connects to Lion's mane, creating a link between Earth and Homeworld that becomes crucial to the plot. Lars is alive again, but he is something else now. Something that exists because of Steven's power. The healing tears he inherited from his mother. The ability to reverse death itself. And here is the weight of that. Steven can bring people back from the dead. His tears have the power of resurrection, but he can never use that power on the one person he most wants to bring back, because his mother's gem is his gem. Rose quartz ceased to exist so that Steven could be born. Her gem is the same gem in his belly. You cannot resurrect someone whose life force is currently keeping you alive. Steven carries the instrument of his mother's potential return inside his own body, and using it would mean unmaking himself. He is, simultaneously, the proof that Rose quartz lived, and the reason she cannot live again. The diamond's tears carry a similar weight. When the diamonds cry together, their combined essence has the power to cure corruption, the psychic damage that shattered the minds of thousands of gems during the war. The diamond bath, the pool of their combined tears, heals what nothing else can heal, and this raises a question that the show lets float without ever anchoring it. Were the diamonds designed to do this? Was their ability to create and destroy built into them on purpose? Are they tools? Are they biological machines constructed by something or someone to serve a function, the function of seeding the universe with gem life and maintaining it through their powers of creation and restoration? Or did they emerge from nothing, self-created, self-defined, with powers that are accidental rather than intentional? Because if they were designed, then there is a designer, and that designer is the true origin of everything, the thing the show refuses to show you, the presence at the very bottom of the iceberg that you can feel but never see. And if they were not designed, if the diamonds simply appeared from the void with the ability to create life and end it, then the universe of Steven Universe is fundamentally arbitrary. There is no grand plan. There is no purpose. There are just these enormously powerful beings doing what they can with abilities they never asked for. And the entire civilizational structure they built, the hierarchy, the castes, the rigid categorization of every gem into a predetermined role, all of it is just their attempt to impose order on a universe that never offered any. Either answer is unsettling. Either answer leaves you in a place where the ground is not quite solid under your feet. And both answers carry implications that ripple outward through every single thing the show has ever shown you. If the diamonds were designed, then every gem that was ever created was created by proxy, a product of a product, a tool made by tools. And every act of rebellion, every moment of self-discovery, every time a gem chose to be something other than what they were made to be, was a defiance not just of the Diamond Authority, but of whatever unknowable force set the whole machine in motion. And if the diamonds were not designed, if they are truly the beginning of the chain, then every act of creation they performed was an act of pure will, unguided and unjustified, which means that the suffering of every gem who was ever made wrong or placed in the wrong caste or shattered for disobedience was meaningless, not cruel by design, just cruel by accident. And somehow that is worse. And the show, wisely, does not choose. It leaves both possibilities open. It lets you feel the weight of the question without offering the relief of an answer. Because that is what the void is. It is not the absence of information. It is the presence of a question so fundamental that answering it would collapse the mystery that gives the story its depth. And maybe that is the deepest thing this iceberg has to offer. Not an answer, but a recognition. That some stories are most powerful not in what they tell you, but in what they leave echoing in the dark. That the parts of a mythology you cannot see are often the parts that hold the most weight. And that a show about a boy with a gemstone in his belly, a show about love and fusion and the radical act of choosing empathy over destruction, a show that was nearly canceled because its creator believed representation was more important than survival. that the show contains depths that you can sink into forever and never quite reach the bottom. That is the void. And if you are still listening, if you are still here at this depth, then maybe the void is not something to be afraid of. Maybe it is just the space where the most interesting questions live, the ones without answers, the ones that keep you thinking long after the screen goes dark, the ones that settle into the back of your mind like sediment at the bottom of the ocean, quiet and heavy and permanent, shaping the landscape of what you believe without you ever noticing it happening. And that, more than any single fact or theory or revelation, is what makes Steven Universe and Iceberg worth diving into. Not because the bottom holds some hidden truth, but because the act of diving itself changes you. The deeper you go, the more you understand, not about the show, about yourself, about what you value, about what you are willing to fight for, about the questions you carry with you into the dark when you close your eyes and let the world go quiet. So let them go quiet now. Let the questions settle. Let the iceberg sit in the cold water of your mind, massive and silent and full of things you will never fully see. That is not a failure. That is a gift. The best stories are the ones that never stop asking. And Steven Universe, from its brightest surface to its deepest void, never stops asking. And this is where the iceberg stops being about the show itself and becomes about everything the show left behind. Because Steven Universe did not just end. It changed the landscape. And that is not hyperbole. It is not the kind of claim you make loosely about a show you happen to love. It is something you can trace year by year, decision by decision, in the shows that came after it and the doors that were closed before it arrived. Before Steven Universe, queer representation on American children's television existed almost entirely in subtext. Characters could be coded, they could be hinted at. Writers could leave enough room for interpretation that a certain audience would understand, while the network could maintain plausible deniability to advertisers and parent groups who might object. That was the deal. That was how it worked for decades. You could feel something in the space between the lines, but the lines themselves were never allowed to say it outright. Rebecca Sugar knew this. Sugar, who is non-binary and bisexual, understood the rules of the system they were working inside. And from the very beginning of Steven Universe, the show began to quietly, deliberately push against those rules. Ruby and Sapphire were introduced in Season 1 as the two halves of Garnet. Their relationship was, at first, easy enough for a cautious network executive to frame as metaphorical. They were not two women in love, they were two components of a fusion. It was alien biology, it was magic. It was plausible deniability wrapped in a gemstone. But the show kept going. It kept making the relationship more explicit, more tender, more undeniable. Ruby and Sapphire held hands, they flirted, they fought the way couples fight, and reconciled the way couples reconcile. And then, on July 6, 2018, in the episode Reunited, they got married. On screen, in a children's cartoon. On Cartoon Network, it was the first same-sex wedding in the history of American children's animation. And the significance of that moment cannot be overstated, because it did not happen in a vacuum. Sugar has spoken publicly about the resistance they faced from the network. There were conversations about what was allowed and what was not. There were markets where the episode was censored or pulled entirely. In some countries, the wedding was edited out. In others, the show simply stopped airing. Sugar has said they were told at various points that certain things could not happen, that the relationship could exist but could not be confirmed, that the characters could be close but could not be romantic. And Sugar kept pushing, kept finding ways to make the text say what the subtext had been saying all along, until the wedding happened and there was nothing left to deny. And here is what matters about that from the perspective of everything that came after. Within 2 years of that wedding airing, She-Ra and the Princesses of Power ended its run on Netflix, with its two female leads sharing a kiss and declaring their love for each other. The Owl House on Disney Channel featured a bisexual protagonist whose girlfriend was one of the central characters of the show. Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts included a gay character whose identity was treated as completely ordinary. Dead End Paranormal Park featured a transgender protagonist. These shows did not happen in spite of Steven Universe. They happened, in part, because of it. Because Sugar and the crew proved that a children's show could be explicit about these things, and the world would not end. That kids would not be harmed. That parents would not revolt en masse. That the audience, actually, was ready, and had been ready for longer than the networks were willing to believe. You can draw a direct line from Ruby and Sapphire's first fusion in Jailbreak to Luz Nocita holding Amity Blight's hand in the Owl House. That line runs through years of negotiation, resistance, compromise, and a few people who decided that telling the truth about love was worth the professional risk. Steven Universe did not do it alone. But it did it first, on a major American children's network, in a show that was explicitly, textually, undeniably about the idea that love is love. and for that it belongs in a different category than almost anything else in the medium. What is easy to forget now, when you can turn on a streaming service and find a dozen animated shows with queer characters, is how recently this was considered impossible. Not controversial. Impossible. The kind of thing that would get a show canceled, a creator blacklisted, a network boycotted into submission. Sugar did not just include representation. They fought for it inside a system that was designed to prevent exactly what they were trying to do. And when the system pushed back, Sugar did not back down. They found workarounds. They built the case slowly across seasons so that by the time the wedding arrived, the relationship was so deeply woven into the fabric of the show that removing it would have meant removing the show itself. That is not just brave storytelling. That is strategic storytelling. And the animators, writers, and voice actors who supported that vision deserve to be remembered alongside Sugar, because none of it was one person's work. But there is a strange and painful irony buried inside this legacy. Because the show that was built on radical empathy, on the idea that every person deserves understanding and that conflict should be met with compassion rather than violence, produced one of the most toxic fan communities in the history of online fandom. This is not speculation. This is documented. In 2015, a fan artist who went by the name Zammy070 was targeted by a sustained harassment campaign from within the Steven Universe fandom. Her offense was drawing fan art of the character Rose Quartz in a way that some fans considered too thin. Rose Quartz in the show is a larger character. The fan art depicted her with a slimmer body type. And for that, Zammy070 was subjected to weeks of coordinated bullying, death threats, call-out posts, and accusations of bigotry that escalated to the point where she attempted to take her own life. She survived, but the incident became a defining moment for the fandom, and not in a way anyone would want. It became a case study in how a community built around a show about kindness could become one of the cruelest spaces on the internet. The reasoning, if you can call it that, was that any deviation from the show's values of body positivity and inclusivity was itself a form of violence, and therefore deserved an aggressive response. The empathy that the show preached was weaponized into a purity test. If you did not perform your understanding of the show's themes in exactly the right way, you were not just wrong, you were dangerous. And dangerous people, in the logic of that particular community, deserved to be destroyed. Rebecca Sugar addressed this. In interviews, Sugar spoke about the pain of seeing the show's message twisted into justification for cruelty. The entire thesis of Steven Universe is that people can change, that everyone deserves a chance at redemption, that violence is not the answer even when it feels righteous. And the fandom, or at least a very loud and very organized subset of it, took that thesis and did the exact opposite with it. They decided that some people were beyond empathy, that some offenses were beyond forgiveness, that the show's values applied to fictional characters but not to real human beings making fan art in their bedrooms. It is one of the strangest contradictions in the history of media fandom. And it was not an isolated incident. Other fan artists were targeted for drawing characters with the wrong skin tone, or for shipping characters the community deemed inappropriate, or for simply engaging with the show in a way that did not conform to the prevailing consensus about what the show meant and who was allowed to interpret it. Voice actors received harassment. Crew members deleted social media accounts. The show's own message boards became places where newcomers were afraid to post because a single misstep in language or framing could result in a pile-on that lasted days. And it raises a question the show itself never quite answers, which is whether empathy can survive contact with the internet. Whether a message about unconditional love can remain unconditional when it is filtered through thousands of anonymous accounts, each one convinced they are the true guardian of the thing they love. The show says yes. The evidence is less certain, and maybe that tension is part of why Steven Universe Future exists. Because Future is not a sequel. It is not a continuation. It is the show turning around and looking at what it cost to tell the story it told, both within the narrative and, if you read between the lines, outside of it. The original Steven Universe asked a question that sounds simple and is not. Can empathy save the world? And across 5 seasons in a movie, it answered yes. Steven talked to his enemies. He listened to them. He found the hurt underneath their anger and he reached for it again and again, even when it nearly killed him. He redeemed the diamonds. He healed corrupted gems. He ended a war that had lasted thousands of years by being willing to understand the people who started it. And the show ended, more or less, on a note of triumph. The world was saved. Love won. Steven Universe Future asked the next question, the harder one. What does saving the world do to the person who saved it? And the answer, it turns out, is not nothing. Future takes place after the happily ever after. The diamonds have reformed. The gems are free, Little Homeschool is up and running, teaching former Homeworld gems how to live on Earth. Beach City is at peace, and Steven is falling apart. He is angry in ways he does not understand. He is having panic attacks. He is picking fights, literal ones, with people who used to be his enemies and are now supposedly his allies. He is lashing out at the people he loves most. He is, for the first time in the entire series, not okay, and nobody around him knows how to help, because for his entire life, Steven was the one who helped everyone else. He was the empathetic center of the universe. He was the fixer, the mediator, the person who walked into every room and made it better. And now he is the problem, and the tools that save the world cannot save him from himself. The empathy that was his greatest strength has become a wound that will not close because he gave all of it away and kept none for himself. In the episode Growing Pains, Steven visits a doctor. Dr. Priyanka Maheswaran, Connie's mother, examines him and realizes that his body is reacting to years of accumulated stress. She does not use the word trauma at first. She calls them adverse childhood experiences. She lists them: being attacked, being kidnapped, being trapped, watching people he loves get hurt, bearing the weight of intergalactic conflict as a child. And as she lists them, Steven's expression changes because he has never heard his life described that way before. He has always framed it as adventure, as purpose, as the thing he was meant to do. And Priyanka is telling him gently and clinically that what happened to him was not normal, that a child should not have gone through those things, that the fact that he survived does not mean he was not damaged. It is one of the most quietly devastating scenes in the entire series, because it reframes the entire show you have been watching. Every fight Steven survived, every kidnapping, every near-death experience that the original series played as heroic, Priyanka is now categorizing as harm. She is not impressed by his bravery. She is alarmed by his history, and for the first time, Steven has to sit with the possibility that the life he was proud of was also the thing that broke him. That reframing ripples forward through the remaining episodes until it reaches the one that serves as the show's true climax. I am my monster. Steven, overwhelmed by guilt and self-loathing and years of suppressed pain, loses control of his powers and transforms into a massive, corrupted creature, a kaiju made of grief. The thing he spent the entire original series healing in others has finally happened to him. He has become the monster. The corruption that the diamonds inflicted on gems at the end of the war, the condition Steven spent years reversing with his healing powers, has now come for him. It is not caused by a weapon. It is caused by feelings he refused to feel. And the resolution is not a fight. It is not a strategy. It is not clever or triumphant. The people who love Steven simply gather around the monster and hold it. They tell him they love him. They tell him he does not have to be strong. They tell him he is allowed to fall apart. And slowly, painfully, he comes back not because anyone fixed him, not because they found the right words or the right technique, but because they stayed. That is it. They stayed, and they held on, and they let him know that he did not have to carry it alone anymore. The original show said empathy can save the world. Future said empathy cannot save you from the cost of using it, but it can save you from disappearing into that cost, if you let the people around you do for you what you spent your whole life doing for everyone else. And that is not a lesson for children. That is a lesson for anyone who has ever put everyone else first and then wondered, quietly, in the dark, why they feel so empty. It is a lesson for caretakers and healers and the people who always say yes when someone needs them and never say yes when they need themselves. That is the thesis, not the original show's thesis, the complete thesis, the one that only exists because both halves of the story were told. And the fact that it was told on a children's network in 11-minute episodes with songs in bright colors and a chubby kid in a star shirt does not make it less profound. It makes it more so, because it means these ideas reached people before they had built the walls that adults build against being moved. It got in early, and for a lot of people, it never left. And the music carries all of it. Steven Universe contains over 100 original songs across its run, which is staggering for any animated series, let alone one on Cartoon Network. Rebecca Sugar wrote most of them, and the songs are not filler. They are not musical numbers inserted for variety. They are the emotional architecture of the show, the moments where the characters say what they cannot say in dialogue, the moments where the subtext becomes text and the walls come down. The end credits theme, Love Like You, is perhaps the most remarkable example. It was released in fragments, a few lines at a time, across the entire run of the original series. Each new set of episodes would add a few more seconds to the song. It began as something that sounded like a love song, simple and sweet. But as more of it was revealed, the meaning shifted. It became a song about self-doubt, about feeling unworthy of the love you are receiving. about watching someone who is good and kind and wondering whether you could ever deserve that kind of attention. Sugar has said the song was written from the perspective of someone who does not believe they are capable of love, watching someone who loves freely and trying to understand it. Over the course of the series, it became a thesis statement in its own right, one that only made sense once you had heard all of it, which meant it only made sense once the show was over. And then there is It's Over, Isn't It? The song Pearl sings in the episode Mr. Greg, Season 3, Episode 8, which aired on July 19, 2016. It is a song about grief and jealousy and the specific pain of loving someone who loved someone else. Pearl loved Rose Quartz. Rose chose Greg, and Pearl has been carrying that loss for thousands of years, through a war, through Rose's death, through the birth of Steven, through everything. The song is a 3-minute confession that the show had been building toward for 3 seasons, and when it arrives, it is devastating. Dee Dee Madgo-Hall's vocal performance moves from restrained resentment to raw heartbreak in a way that feels less like acting and more like testimony. It has been called one of the greatest songs in the history of animation, and that claim is not unreasonable. It does in 3 minutes what most shows cannot do in an entire season. It makes you understand a character completely. You do not just learn that Pearl is grieving, you feel the texture of that grief. The decades of it. The way it has calcified into something that is not quite anger and not quite sadness, but something older and heavier than both. Other songs do similar work throughout the series. Stronger Than You, which plays during Garnet's fight with Jasper in Jailbreak, was the first time a children's cartoon featured a song that was explicitly a love song between 2 female-coded characters. Here Comes a Thought, from the episode Mindful Education in Season 4, is essentially a guided meditation set to music, teaching the viewer and the characters how to sit with painful feelings instead of running from them. These are not background tracks. They are load-bearing walls in the emotional structure of the show. Remove any one of them and the story around it collapses. And what is remarkable is that the songs work on 2 levels simultaneously. For the casual viewer, they are catchy and emotionally direct. For the person paying closer attention, they contain the show's deepest arguments, delivered in a form that bypasses your defenses in a way dialogue never could. Sugar understood, perhaps better than any other showrunner working in animation, that music does not just support emotion, it creates it. And in a show about a boy who heals people by understanding their feelings, the music is not decoration, it is the method. And yet, even after everything the show explored and everything it resolved, there are threads that remain open. Questions the show raised and then, deliberately or not, never answered. Jasper's original crew, the soldiers she commanded during the Gem War, are never accounted for. We know Jasper served under Pink Diamond. We know she was a perfect court soldier, the ideal specimen of her kind. We know the war shattered everything she believed in. But the other soldiers, the ones who followed her, fought beside her, survived or did not survive the corruption blast, they are ghosts. The show gives you enough to know they existed and not enough to know what happened to them. The bubbled rose quartz gems kept in Pink Diamond's zoo are another open door. Pink Diamond created an entire line of rose quartz soldiers, then had them all bubbled after the original rose quartz was blamed for shattering her. Those gems are still there in the zoo, frozen in stasis. The show acknowledges their existence, but never shows them being freed. You are left to wonder whether anyone went back for them, whether, in the new era of peace and freedom that Steven fought to create, someone remembered the prisoners. Then there is the origin of the diamonds themselves. Where did they come from? What created beings powerful enough to colonize galaxies and create entire species of sentient life? The show gestures at this question without ever approaching an answer. White Diamond, the oldest and most powerful, is presented as something close to a primordial force, but even she has a personality. She laughs, she gets flustered, she admits she was wrong. Whatever created the diamonds, it gave them the capacity for growth, even if they spent millions of years refusing to use it. That question, the origin of the diamonds, might be the deepest point on this entire iceberg. Not because the answer would change anything about the story, but because the absence of the answer tells you something about the kind of story Steven Universe wanted to be. It did not want to explain everything. It wanted to give you enough to wonder. And that is the recurring motif at every level of this iceberg. The show gives you just enough to understand, enough to care, enough to keep thinking about it long after the credits roll. But never so much that the mystery is gone. Never so much that there is nothing left to discover. The Sneeple theory is a perfect example. Ronaldo Fryman, the conspiracy-obsessed teenager who runs a blog called Keep Beach City Weird, develops a theory early in the series that snake people, which he calls Sneeple, are secretly controlling the world. It is played for laughs. Ronaldo is treated as an eccentric, a well-meaning oddball who sees patterns that are not there. But here's the thing. His theory is almost entirely correct, not about the snake people specifically, but about the structure of what is happening. There is a secret alien race controlling things from behind the scenes. There is a massive conspiracy to hide the truth from ordinary humans. There are beings living among them who are not what they appear to be. Ronaldo gets every detail wrong and every broad stroke right, and the show never stops to acknowledge this directly. It just lets you notice. It lets you sit with the irony that the character everyone dismisses as delusional is actually the closest to the truth of anyone in Beach City who is not already a crystal gem. That layering, the way Steven Universe embeds its real answers inside things that look like jokes, is what makes the Iceberg so deep. Because you can never be sure when the show is kidding. You can never be completely confident that a throwaway line is actually a throwaway. The Cookie Cat jingle in the very first episode describes an interstellar fugitive who left his family behind to start a new life on Earth. That is Rose Quartz. That is the entire premise of the show, delivered as a jingle for a novelty ice cream bar in the first 5 minutes. And you do not realize it until you are 3 seasons deep and the reveal hits you like a freight train made of feelings. The show does this constantly. It hides its most important information in the most casual, forgettable moments. Lion's Mane contains Rose's sword, her battle flag, a videotape, and eventually a portal to a pocket dimension where she stored everything she wanted to keep secret. All of that is accessible from the first time Steven falls asleep on Lion's back. The show just does not tell you it matters yet. It lets you assume the pink lion is weird and move on. And then, hours later, it pulls back the curtain and you realize that every quiet moment with Lion was actually a moment spent sitting on top of a vault of secrets. This is why rewatching Steven Universe is such a different experience from watching it the first time. The first time, you are following a story. The second time, you are reading a code. Every background detail, every offhand comment, every character who seems unimportant suddenly becomes a potential clue. And the show rewards that attention. It rewards it consistently and generously, planting seeds in season 1 that do not bloom until season 5, hiding answers to questions you have not thought to ask yet. Consider the mural in the Pyramid Temple, which appears in the season 1 episode Serious Steven. It depicts a battle between Rose Quartz and a figure with a diamond shape. At the time of airing, this was just a cool piece of background art, a mythic image that suggested Rose had a dramatic past. But after the pink diamond reveal, that mural becomes a confession. It is literally a painting of the truth, displayed in plain sight, years before the show officially tells you what happened. Rose fighting a diamond is not metaphorical, it is autobiographical. She was that diamond. She was fighting herself, or rather, fighting the version of herself she had decided to leave behind. And the show put it on a wall in the background of a season 1 episode and trusted you to come back and find it later. The cluster deserves its own moment of quiet consideration here. Buried deep inside the Earth, the cluster is a forced fusion of billions of gem shards, fragments of shattered gems pressed together against their will, growing and gestating inside the planet's mantle, like an egg of pure suffering. When it hatches, and it is always described as hatching rather than erupting or exploding, it will destroy the Earth. Not as a weapon, not as an attack, but simply as a consequence of its existence. It is too large to emerge without tearing the planet apart. The cluster is one of the most horrifying concepts in the entire show, and the show handles it with remarkable restraint. It does not sensationalize the horror, it does not linger on the grotesque implications of billions of shattered conscious beings forced into an eternal unwilling fusion. It acknowledges it, treats it with gravity, and then has Steven solve the problem not through violence, but through empathy. He reaches the cluster. He communicates with it, he helps the individual shards within it find each other, form small voluntary fusions, and collectively choose to stay dormant. He does not destroy the cluster. He does not disperse it. He helps it make peace with itself, and the show treats this as the correct solution. Not a temporary fix, not a stopgap, but the actual answer. You do not destroy suffering, you help it find a way to coexist with itself. That idea runs through every level of this iceberg. From the surface, where Steven is just a kind boy who wants to help, down to the deepest points, where the show is asking whether empathy can function as a universal problem-solving mechanism, the answer is always the same. Understanding is not weakness. Compassion is not naivety. Choosing to listen instead of fight is not the easy path. It is the harder one, and it is the one that works. The international censorship of the show sits at one of the more uncomfortable levels of the iceberg. Steven Universe was edited, altered, or outright banned in multiple countries due to its depiction of same-sex relationships and gender nonconformity. The United Kingdom censored Ruby and Sapphire's relationship in early episodes, cutting or altering scenes that made their romantic connection explicit. Russia altered scenes to remove references to fusion as an intimate act between two female-coded characters. Some countries refused to air certain episodes entirely. The wedding between Ruby and Sapphire in the Season 5 episode Reunited, which aired on July 6, 2018, was a landmark moment in Western animation. It was the first same-sex wedding depicted in a children's cartoon, and it almost did not happen. Rebecca Sugar has spoken in interviews about the fight to include it, about the network's hesitation, about the real possibility that showing two female-coded characters getting married on a children's show would result in the show being pulled from international markets entirely. They did it anyway. The scene aired. Ruby and Sapphire exchanged vows, fused into Garnet, and the show continued. Some countries cut the seam. Some countries stopped airing the show. And the episode still exists, unchanged, as a record of what was possible when a creator decided that representing her audience mattered more than protecting her distribution numbers. This is not trivia. This is the part of the iceberg where art and politics become inseparable, where the decisions made in a writer's room in Burbank, California, had measurable consequences for queer children watching cartoons in countries where their existence was considered unacceptable. Steven Universe did not fix homophobia. It did not change any laws, but it gave a generation of kids a mirror, and for some of them, it was the first mirror they had ever seen. That matters. That matters at a level that goes far deeper than any Easter egg or hidden detail or production secret. It matters because stories are not just stories, they are the infrastructure of how people learn to see themselves. Steven Universe Future, the epilogue series that aired from December 2019 to March 2020, sits at a level of the iceberg that most people have not fully processed yet, because Future did something that almost no show does. It told the truth about what happens after the hero wins. Steven saves the universe. He reforms the diamonds. He brings peace to a civilization that had known nothing but rigid hierarchy and conquest for millennia. And then Future asks a question that the original series carefully avoided. What happens to the hero when there is nothing left to save? The answer is not triumphant. Steven, in Future, is falling apart. Not metaphorically, although the metaphors are there. He is literally destabilizing his gem powers, responding to his repressed trauma by manifesting his uncontrollable transformations, violent outbursts, and eventually a complete physical breakdown. He swells, he corrupts, he becomes a monster, a massive pink kaiju stomping through Beach City, unable to speak, unable to reason, unable to do anything except express the pain he has been carrying since childhood. And the show does not solve this with a fight. It does not solve it with a clever plan or a dramatic sacrifice or a last-minute power-up. It solves it with a hug. The people who love Steven, the crystal gems, his father, his friends, Connie, everyone, they surround the monster he has become, and they hold on. They do not try to fix him. They do not try to change him back. They just stay with him, and slowly, painfully, he comes back. He shrinks. He cries. He returns to himself, not because someone healed him, but because someone stayed. That scene is the thesis of the entire franchise. Not empathy as a weapon, not compassion as a strategy, but love as the willingness to be present with someone in their worst moment without trying to make it better. Just being there. Just holding on. That is what Steven Universe is about, at every level of the iceberg, from the shallowest joke to the deepest philosophy. The show believes with absolute conviction that the most powerful thing you can do for another person is stay. Rebecca Sugar left Cartoon Network after Steven Universe Future concluded. She had spent nearly a decade building this world, fighting for its right to exist, pushing against the boundaries of what children's animation was allowed to say and show and be. And then she walked away, not in anger, not in protest, but in the way that any artist walks away from a finished work. It was done. The story she wanted to tell had been told. The kids she wanted to reach had been reached, and whatever came next, it would not be Steven Universe. It would be something new. But the iceberg remains. That is the nature of icebergs. They do not melt because the person who found them moves on. They sit in the water, massive and patient, waiting for the next person to swim out far enough to see them. And Steven Universe, this strange, gentle, impossible show about a boy and his feelings, and his dead alien mother and his 3 magical guardians, and a town full of people who are all, every single one of them, trying their best, that show is still there. Still waiting. Still deeper than you think. And maybe that is the point. Maybe the iceberg is not meant to be fully explored. Maybe the act of diving is enough. You go as deep as you can. You find what you find. You surface with something you did not have before, some small piece of understanding, some quiet revelation that changes the way you see the show or the world or yourself. And then you let it go. You let the water close over the parts you could not reach, and you carry what you found back to the surface. and you let it sit with you while you fall asleep. Think back to that pilot, September 2013. A rough, unpolished 11 minutes uploaded to a website with no fanfare. A boy with a higher voice and a less certain smile, a pink lion sleeping in the desert doing absolutely nothing. Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody could have known. And Rebecca Sugar, sitting somewhere with a plan that stretched years into the future, a mythology so dense it would take half a decade to unravel, she knew. She knew the lion mattered. She knew the boy would grow. She knew the ice cream jingle was a prophecy and the mural was a confession and the quiet moments were the loudest ones. She knew all of it, and she buried it, carefully, deliberately at every level of the show, and trusted you to find it when you were ready. You were ready a long time ago. You just did not know it yet. Subscribe for more Steven Universe analysis. Sleep well.